Eleanor Whitmore pressed the barrel of her dead husband's rifle against the cellar door and told herself she would pull the trigger if she had to. She was 22 years old. She had not slept in 4 days. Behind her in the dark, her 3 younger siblings were breathing the shallow, frightened breaths of children who had learned by hard experience to make themselves small and silent. That was the summer of 1876. That was the summer a stranger's knock changed every single thing that came after. If this story reaches something real inside you, subscribe to this channel, stay until the very last word, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far Eleanor's story travels. Now let's begin. The knock came just after midnight. Not loud, not the kind of knock that announced itself with authority or threat. Just 3 slow, deliberate taps against the cellar door above her head, and Eleanor Whitmore was on her feet before the third one landed rifle up, heart slamming so hard against her ribs she could feel it in her back teeth. "Ellie!" Jesse's voice came from the corner, sleep rough and urgent. He was 10 years old, and he was already reaching for the hunting knife on the ground beside him, the one that had belonged to their father and was too big for his hand by a considerable margin. "Stay down," she said. "But, Jesse, down." He went down. He always did eventually. That was the thing about Jesse. He argued first and obeyed second, but he obeyed. She'd learned to count on that ordering. May was already awake, sitting up straight in the dark with her arms around Rosie, who was 5 years old and still mostly asleep, her face pressed into May's shoulder. May was 8, and she had the particular stillness of a child who had decided some time ago that the world was a place that required constant watching. She didn't make a sound. She just looked at Eleanor with those wide, patient eyes and waited. Eleanor put her foot on the first rung of the ladder. The knock came again. Same rhythm. 3 taps, slow and deliberate, and then a voice. "I'm not here to cause you harm." Low. A man's voice roughened by weather and years. "I know you're in there. I've known for 2 days. If I meant trouble, I'd have brought it before now." Eleanor's hand tightened on the rifle. "Ride on," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she'd expected. She filed that away as a small mercy. A pause. "Can't do that, ma'am." "Why not?" "Because I've been watching this property since Tuesday evening, and I've seen a little girl come out twice for water and go back down looking like she hasn't eaten since Sunday. And I'm not built for riding past that." The silence stretched. Eleanor's jaw was so tight it ached. "Leave food on the ground and go," she said. "I'd be glad to, but I need you to hear me out first. 60 seconds. That's all I'm asking." She should have said no. Every rational piece of her said no. 60 seconds was 60 seconds a man could use to signal someone, to position someone, to set something in motion that couldn't be stopped. She'd spent 4 days making decisions based on what was rational and careful and safe. She'd also spent 4 days watching Rosie get thinner. 30, she said. Another pause. And then, something that might have been a low, quiet sound of respect. "Fair enough. My name is Cole Hargrove. I run the Broken Horn Ranch about 8 miles east. I know who Raymond Daltrey is, and I know what he's been doing in this county for the last 6 years, and I know that whatever your father signed, he signed it under conditions that no honest judge would call voluntary." A beat. "I'm not offering charity. I'm offering work and a roof and meals and a reason to stop hiding in the ground." 12 seconds left on her count. "Why?" she said. The silence on the other side of the door had weight in it, the kind that pressed. "Because somebody should have opened a door for me once," he said quietly, "and nobody did." Jesse made a sound in the corner. Eleanor didn't look at him. "Mr. Hargrove?" "Ma'am?" "Step back 10 paces from this door and keep your hands where I can see them. I'm coming up, and I will have this rifle and I will use it." "I'd expect nothing less." She heard him step back. She counted boots on the dry ground until she got to 10. Then she unlatched the cellar door and pushed it open and came up into the night air with the rifle at her shoulder and her eyes moving fast across every shadow. He was standing exactly where he'd said he'd be, Cole Hargrove was somewhere north of 40 broad, through the shoulders, with the kind of face that had been put through something difficult, and come out the other side, not broken, but changed, reshaped by it, the way iron was reshaped by heat. Dark hair, gray at the edges. A jaw that needed a razor's attention. He wore a weathered canvas coat and a hat that had been good once and was still serviceable, and he held his hands out to his sides with his palms open and forward, and he did not look away when she looked at him. She kept the rifle up. "How do you know Daltrey?" she said. "Everybody in 4 counties knows Daltrey." He didn't move. "He's been manufacturing debt and collecting land for going on 6 years. Your father wasn't his first, and he won't be his last." "My father made his own choices," Eleanor said, and the bitterness in her voice surprised her. She hadn't meant to let that out. Not like that. Not to a stranger. Something shifted in Hargrove's face. Not pity. She'd had enough pity from enough people to recognize it on sight, and she hated it with a specific and personal fury. This was something else. Something closer to recognition. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. "Sometimes they do." She studied him for a long moment. He let her. He didn't fidget or smile or try to fill the silence the way men did when they were trying to appear harmless and weren't. He just stood there with his hands open and let her look like he understood she had every right to take as long as she needed. "There are 3 children down there," she said. "I know. They're not your charity cases. They're my family and my responsibility, and wherever I go, they go. Understood? And if you're lying to me, I'm not." "If you are," she said, and let the rifle finish the sentence. He nodded once slowly, like a man taking an oath. "I understand that completely, Miss Whitmore. And I think you mean every word of it, which is exactly why I'm standing here." She held the rifle for another 10 seconds. Then she lowered it. Not all the way, just enough to signal that she was willing to keep talking. "I'll need to bring the children up," she said. "Take your time." She went back to the cellar door and stopped. "Mr. Hargrove." "Ma'am?" "You said somebody should have opened a door for you. What did you mean by that?" The pause that followed was the longest yet. The kind of pause that had mass. "I had a wife," he said. 2 boys. There was a season when we needed help, and there wasn't anybody willing to give it." He stopped. "I think about that more than I'd like to." She didn't say anything. She went back down the ladder. Jesse was on his feet with the knife. May was standing with Rosie on her hip. All 3 of them were looking at Eleanor with the particular focused attention of children who had learned that Eleanor's face was the instrument by which they measured whether something was safe or not. "Who is he?" Jesse said. "A man who says he can help us." "What kind of man?" "The kind with a ranch and a roof." She was already moving, folding the single blanket that was still in decent condition, tucking their few belongings into the flour sack. "The kind who's been watching this cellar for 2 days and hasn't brought Daltrey's men with him." Jesse's jaw worked. "How do you know he won't?" She paused. Looked at her brother. At that 10-year-old face trying so hard to be older than it was. At the dark circles under his eyes, and the way his collar sat loose on a neck that had gotten too thin. "I don't know for certain," she said. "But Rosie needs food. And May hasn't spoken in 2 days, and you're breathing like your chest hurts." "Jesse, don't tell me it doesn't." Jesse's jaw tightened. He didn't deny it. "We're going," she said. She climbed up first with Rosie on her arm and the rifle in her free hand. Jesse came next, and then May silent and watchful, her eyes already moving to the man standing 10 paces away in the dark. Hargrove looked at all 4 of them. At Rosie half asleep on Eleanor's shoulder, at Jesse's thin face, and the knife that was clearly too big for him. At May, who was staring at Hargrove with the solemn, measuring look of a child who had decided she was going to figure out exactly what kind of person he was before she committed to anything. He didn't say a word. He walked to his horse, opened the saddlebag, and lifted out a cloth-wrapped bundle. He carried it over to Jesse and held it out. "Cornbread,"
This
he
story
said.
was posted on the
"Dried beef
channel The
underneath.
Rusty Saddle.
Made this
Please
morning."
do not repost it in
Jesse
any form.
looked at Eleanor. She nodded. Jesse took the bundle with both hands and unwrapped the corner and looked inside, and the expression that crossed his face was the most unguarded thing Eleanor had seen in 2 weeks. Pure raw hunger mixing with an attempt to maintain some version of dignity. "Thank you, sir," he said. "You're welcome, son." Rosie woke up smelling the food. She lifted her head from Eleanor's shoulder and blinked at the bundle in Jesse's hands, and then looked at Hargrove with the complete unself-conscious directness of a 5-year-old. "Are you the one who's going to help us?" she said. Hargrove pulled his hat off. He held it at his side and looked at Rosie with the gravity her question deserved. "Yes, little miss," he said. "That's what I'm aiming to do." Rosie looked at Eleanor. "I like him," she announced. Jesse made a sound that was half laugh and half something he was trying very hard not to be, and he turned his face away and took a deliberate bite of cornbread. May hadn't moved. She was still watching Hargrove with those still serious eyes. Then she reached into her pocket and held something out toward him. A small river stone, smooth and gray, the kind a child kept for no reason except that it felt right in the hand. Hargrove looked at it. Then he looked at May. "What's this for?" he said. May was quiet for a moment. "I give those to people I'm deciding about," she said. "So I can think." Hargrove took the stone, turned it over in his palm. "And when you're done thinking, I'll let you know," May said. Something moved at the corners of Hargrove's mouth. He put the stone carefully in his vest pocket. "Fair enough," he said. Eleanor had not cried once in 4 days because she could not afford to. She felt something press hard behind her sternum and pressed back just as hard. "All right, Mr. Hargrove," she said. "Lead the way." He put his hat back on. He turned toward his horse, and then, like an afterthought that wasn't an afterthought at all, he stopped and looked back at all 4 of them standing there in the dark. "You're going to be all right," he said, and it didn't sound like something a man said to make a situation easier. It sounded like a man who had decided something. Eleanor didn't answer, but she followed. The ride to the Broken Horn took most of an hour. Eleanor rode behind Hargrove with Rosie between them, one arm around the little girl and the other hand resting on the rifle across her thighs. Jesse and May rode the pack mule Hargrove had brought, Jesse holding the reins with the careful concentration of a boy who hadn't ridden in 2 years and would rather break his arm than admit it. Nobody talked much. Eleanor used the quiet the way she used everything as material. She turned Hargrove over in her mind, checked every angle. He'd said the right things. He'd brought food. He'd stood exactly 10 paces back with his palms open. She knew that none of that was proof of anything on its own. Men who wanted things from you were often very accomplished at doing the right things first. She watched the back of his neck, the set of his shoulders, the way he sat in the saddle easy and straight, the ease of someone who had spent decades on horseback, not someone performing competence. He hadn't tried to charm her, hadn't tried to fill the dark with reassurances. She appreciated that with a depth she couldn't fully articulate. When the ranch came into view, Rosie stirred and lifted her head. "Is that it?" "That's it," Hargrove said. Rosie was quiet for a moment. "It's big. It'll do." Eleanor said nothing. She was taking inventory. The fences, the state of the outbuildings, the condition of the stock she could make out in the dark. A working ranch. Not prosperous in the showy way, not the kind with a dozen hands and new paint on every board, but solid, maintained, the kind of place someone came home to at the end of the day. A man came out of the barn as they pulled up. He was somewhere around 60, with a gray beard and a permanent squint that looked like it had been made by years of reading horizons, and he moved with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had been doing physical work his entire life and intended to keep doing it. "Burl," Hargrove said. Burl looked at the 4 of them. His expression didn't change except for something that moved briefly through his eyes. Not surprise, exactly, more like a kind of weighted recognition, as if he'd been expecting something like this, and had simply not known what shape it would take. "East room's still made up," he said. "I'll put a fire on." He went back inside. Eleanor looked at Hargrove. "He doesn't ask many questions," she said. "He already knows the ones that matter," Hargrove said. "Come on." He took them through the kitchen first, and Eleanor understood immediately why. Jesse walked in and stopped dead. The expression on his face was the most honest thing she'd seen from him in 2 weeks. Pure unguarded, a child confronted with normalcy after a long absence of it. The smell of a kitchen that had been used that morning. A room that existed for the purpose of keeping people fed. May pressed close to Jesse's side without a word. Hargrove pulled out a chair at the kitchen table. "Sit," he said, not unkindly. "All of you. I'll put something together." "You cook." The question was out of Eleanor's mouth before she'd decided to ask it. "I cook what I have to." He was already at the stove. He glanced back at her. "You don't have to stand in the doorway, Miss Whitmore." She hadn't noticed she was doing it. Standing at the threshold with her back half turned and one foot still angled toward the exit. 4 days in a cellar did things to a person's instincts. She came in. She sat down. She kept the rifle across her knees under the table because some instincts weren't worth fighting just yet. Rosie climbed up onto the chair beside her and immediately put her head down on the table, and Eleanor realized the little girl had decided the crisis was over. She'd eaten 2 pieces of cornbread on the ride and apparently concluded that Eleanor would handle whatever came next. 5 years old and completely certain. That certainty sat on Eleanor's chest like a stone. Hargrove cooked in silence. Eggs, salt pork biscuits, warmed on the iron. When he set the plates down, Jesse ate with the focused intensity of a child who had learned not to waste a single bite, and May followed his lead with quiet precision. Rosie woke up enough to eat and then started drooping again. Eleanor didn't touch her plate. Hargrove sat down across from her. He looked at the untouched plate. Then he looked at her. "You planning to eat?" he said, "or just watch the rest of them do it?" "Both," she said. Something shifted at the corners of his mouth. "Eat first. There's nothing coming through that door in the next 10 minutes. She looked at him for a moment. Then she picked up the fork. The food was plain, and it was the best thing she had tasted in 6 days, and she ate it without saying so, because she didn't trust herself to say it without something else coming out along with the words. Something that had been under pressure for a long time. She was nearly finished when Hargrove set his own fork down. "I need to tell you something about Daltrey," he said. "And I need you to hear it without putting your hand back on that rifle." Eleanor set the fork down. She didn't reach for the rifle, but she noted that he'd been tracking exactly where it was. "Tell me," she said. "He came to the Broken Horn 4 days ago. He knew your family was in the area. Word travels fast in this county." Hargrove held her gaze. "He told me if I came across any of the Whitmore children I was to send word to him. Said they were under his protection." The word protection landed in the room like something thrown hard. "Under his protection," Eleanor repeated. "That's the word he used." "What did you tell him?" "I told him I hadn't seen any children and didn't expect to." A pause. "I wasn't lying when I said it. I hadn't found you yet." "And now you have." "Now I have." "So what changes?" "Nothing changes," he said flat and direct. "You're here. You're staying. What Daltrey thinks about that is his concern." Jesse had stopped eating. He was watching Hargrove with those old before-their-time eyes. "Is he going to come here?" Jesse said. Hargrove looked at the boy. "He might," he said. "I'm not going to lie to you about that." "Jesse," Eleanor said. "But take your sisters. Go with Burl. Stay close to the house." Jesse started to argue. She could see it in the set of his jaw, that particular angle of stubbornness that was purely their mother's, but he read something in her face and swallowed it. He pushed back from the table. "Come on, May. Rosie." He picked Rosie up. The little girl barely stirred, and May followed him through the back door without a word. When the door closed,
This story was
Eleanor
posted
turned
on the
back to
channel The
Hargrove.
Rusty Saddle.
How
Please
much time
do not
we have?
repost it in any
A few
form.
days, maybe less. He leaned back in his chair. Daltrey likes people to sweat before he moves. But he'll move. What does he actually want? The edge in her voice was deliberate. He already has the land my father signed over. What does he get from coming after 3 children? Hargrove was quiet, in the way that meant he was deciding how much to say. She recognized that particular silence by now. Your father didn't only sign over the land, he said finally. Eleanor went very still. There's another document. Daltrey claims your father signed over legal guardianship of the minor children as part of the debt settlement. He met her eyes. If your siblings become his wards, he gains administrative authority over your father's federal land filing. The parcel to the north, the one your father registered before everything went wrong. How much is it worth? More than the farm. More than Daltrey's entire current operation. The silence in the kitchen was absolute. Eleanor could hear her own pulse. He wants to own my siblings, she said. Not a question. Stated flat and plain the way you stated things that your mind needed to hear out loud to accept. He wants the land, Hargrove said. Your siblings are the mechanism. Same thing. She was on her feet before she'd decided to stand. The rifle was in her hand. She was looking at nothing in particular because if she looked at something specific, she might do something she couldn't take back. Sarah. His voice was quiet. Direct. Her given name, not ma'am, not Miss Whitmore. She looked at him. I know what you're thinking, he said. You're thinking you need to run, get them further, somewhere Daltrey can't reach. Isn't that what I should do? Running didn't work for 4 days, he said. It won't work now. He has riders in every direction and money enough to cover the territory. He stood, and he didn't come toward her, just stood on his own side of the table, steady and unhurried. The only thing Daltrey doesn't have is a legal challenge he can't purchase. The law in this county is his. Not the federal circuit judge, Hargrove said. Judge Alderman rides through in 6 weeks. 6 weeks. 6 weeks felt like standing at the edge of a cliff and being told the bottom wasn't as far down as it looked. You'd do that, she said slowly. Take that on. For children you met tonight. He didn't answer right away. He looked at the table for a moment, and when he looked back up, his face had gone very quiet, the way it did when something underneath was doing real work. My boys would have been Jesse's age, he said. Give or take. Eleanor didn't move. My wife and my sons died 3 years ago. His voice was even. The kind of even that had been worked at over a long time from something that had been very uneven before. Fever. Fast. There were people I could have called on. Nobody came. He looked at her directly. I'm not telling you that for sympathy. I'm telling you why I've been watching this property for 2 days instead of riding past it. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, she could hear Burl's voice, low and steady, talking to the children about something. She could hear Rosie's voice answering thin, and already almost cheerful, in the way Rosie was always almost cheerful, because Rosie had not yet learned to protect herself from the possibility of good things. Eleanor sat back down. She set the rifle on the table between them, like a thing she was willing to put down for now in this room. 6 weeks, she said. 6 weeks, he agreed. And until then you work. The children are safe here. Burl doesn't talk, and the 2 hands I have left are loyal, and neither of them owes Daltrey anything. He met her eyes. When Daltrey comes, and he will come, we don't run. We stand. That's easy to say. Yes, ma'am. He didn't pretend otherwise. It's also the truth. She looked at him for a long time, long enough that a different kind of man would have shifted or looked away, or tried to ease the silence with something calculated to make her feel better. He didn't. He held still like he understood she needed to see him clearly, and the best thing he could do was give her a clear view. I'll need to know everything about the guardianship document, she said. Every word you know. And I'll need— She stopped. What? I'll need you to not make promises you won't keep, she said quietly. The children trust fast. Rosie especially. I cannot watch them give that to someone who— She stopped again. Set her jaw. I understand, he said. Do you? I think I do. And I think you'll be watching every day to make sure I'm keeping to it. A pause. Which is exactly what I'd want you to do. She hadn't expected that. She hadn't expected him to hand her the authority so plainly, without the small defensive adjustments men usually made when a woman told them she intended to pay attention. She picked up the fork again. There was still food on the plate. I'll start on whatever needs doing in the house tomorrow morning, she said. Today the children need to sleep. Agreed. And Mr. Hargrove. Cole, he said. Quiet. Not a demand. Just an opening left unlocked. She looked at him across the table. If you know where my father is, she said. Any idea at all, I want to know. The silence that followed was different from the others, heavier, more specific. I have a suspicion, he said. But I won't give you a suspicion dressed up as a fact. Give me 2 days to look into something first. The spike of frustration was immediate and sharp. She pressed it down. 1 day, she said. 2, he said. She looked at him. He looked back. 2, she said. And it felt like the first negotiation she'd had with someone who was negotiating straight. She stood, picked up the rifle, moved toward the back door. Miss Whitmore. She stopped. Didn't turn. 11 days, he said. 4 days in that cellar. Whatever you're carrying about those days, you did right by them. Every single one of those days. She stood in the doorway for 3 full seconds with her back to him. Then she walked out into the night and sat down beside her siblings in the dark, and she put her arm around Rosie, and she did not say a word, and for a long moment she let herself be still. Jesse was watching her. Is it going to be okay? He said. She thought about the guardianship document. She thought about Daltrey, somewhere in the dark, with money, and riders, and purchased pieces of the law. She thought about 6 weeks, and a federal judge, and a man sitting at a kitchen table who had lost everything, and still came to a cellar door in the middle of the night. Not yet, she said. But it might be. Jesse leaned against her shoulder. This boy, who had been trying to be the man of the family since he was 8 years old, who had been carrying more weight than any 10-year-old had any business carrying. She felt the solid warmth of him and said nothing. She did not lower her guard. She wasn't built to do that quickly, and she knew it. But she let Jesse lean. She kept her eyes on the dark. She breathed in the summer air, and she waited. And somewhere behind her inside the house, she heard Burl moving through the kitchen, the ordinary, unremarkable sound of a man finishing the work of an ordinary evening. She hadn't heard anything that ordinary in a very long time. It was the most dangerous feeling in the world, the feeling of almost being safe, because almost safe meant you had something to lose again. And she had spent 4 days making herself believe she had nothing left to lose. She'd been wrong. She'd been carrying everything that mattered the whole time. Rosie reached up in the dark and put her small hand over Eleanor's. Eleanor held on. The night stayed quiet. For now. Part 2. Louis, Viet Haingen Num Trum, Den Haingen Tam Trum. Từ liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện pha hội thoại, tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước, không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch, sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần, duy trì chủ đề. Tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề, phụ phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc chân thực và gần gũi, không mô tả cảnh, tập trung vào hành động, cảm xúc và tâm lý nhân vật. Kẻ theo ngôi thứ 3, giữ độ kịch tính, không viết lân man, kết thúc phần không giới thiệu phần sau. Lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhây sang mục document 1558. Orchestrated rising action narrative with dialogue, emotional depth, and seamless continuity. Orchestrated rising action narrative
This
with
story was
dialogue,
posted on the channel The
emotional
Rusty
depth,
Saddle.
and
Please do not
seamless
repost it
continuity.
in any form.
3 days passed at the Broken Horn Ranch, and Eleanor spent every one of them the same way. Working from the first gray edge of dawn until her hands ached and her eyes burned, because work was the only thing that kept her mind from running ahead to every possible disaster waiting around the next bend in the road. She cleaned the kitchen until it gleamed. She mended the curtains in the east room where the children slept. She helped Burl haul feed from the barn without asking and without explaining herself. And, if he noticed she was carrying more than she needed to, he had the good sense not to comment on it. She appreciated that about Burl. He operated on a principle she recognized: say what needs saying, leave the rest alone. Cole was up before her every morning. She discovered that on the second day when she came downstairs in the dark and found the coffee already made and the back door standing open. She'd stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment with the rifle in her hand, looking at that open door, reading it. Then she poured herself a cup and went to stand at the threshold, and he was out there 30 feet away at the fence line, looking east toward nothing she could see. She didn't say anything. He didn't either. They stood like that until the sky started to lighten, and then she went back inside and started on breakfast, and neither of them mentioned it. It happened again the third morning. She stopped examining it too closely after that. The children settled in with a speed that unsettled her in ways she couldn't fully explain. Rosie had claimed a spotted barn cat on the first afternoon, a lean, opinionated animal that wanted nothing to do with being claimed and was slowly losing the argument. She followed it around the property, conducting a steady, earnest, one-sided conversation. And the cat tolerated this with the resigned dignity of a creature that had seen worse. Jesse had attached himself to Burl the way a drowning person attached to something solid. Burl, who apparently spoke the language of boys who needed something to do with their hands, had put him to work in the barn, without ceremony or condescension, treating him with the matter-of-fact respect of a man who judged a person by what they did, and not by how old they were. Jesse had come in at the end of the second day with dirt on his face, and a kind of quiet pride in his posture that Eleanor hadn't seen since before their father's troubles had become the family's troubles. May was the one Eleanor watched most carefully. May, who was 8 years old, and said almost nothing, who observed everything with those wide, still eyes, who had started on the second morning to follow Cole at a distance. Not close enough to be conspicuous, or so she seemed to think. Eleanor noticed. She noticed everything where her siblings were concerned. And she noticed that May had appointed herself to the business of figuring out Cole Hargrove, and that she was going about it the way May went about everything, patiently, systematically, without showing her hand. On the evening of the third day, Eleanor was at the kitchen window when she saw Cole stop in the middle of the yard and turn around. He'd spotted May. She'd been 10 feet behind him, silent as smoke. May froze. Cole crouched down to her level. Eleanor was too far away to hear what passed between them, but she watched May's face go through something she couldn't fully read, that careful, guarded expression working through something complicated underneath it. Then May reached into her pocket and produced a second riverstone, smooth and pale, and held it out. Cole took it. He looked at it with the full seriousness the moment deserved. He said something. May studied him for 3 long seconds. Then barely she nodded. Eleanor turned away from the window before she could see more. There was a tightness in her chest she didn't trust herself to examine. She was still telling herself that night, lying in the dark beside Rosie's slow, even breathing, be grateful. Be careful. Don't confuse a man being decent for 3 days with a man you know. 3 days was nothing. 3 days didn't tell you who a person was when the cost of being decent got high. She was still telling herself that on the morning of the 4th day, when Burl came through the back door and said without particular inflection, "Rider coming up the east road, 2 of them. One I recognize." Cole was at the window before Burl finished the sentence. Eleanor crossed to stand beside him and looked out at the road. 2 riders. coming slow. The kind of slow that was deliberate, a message wrapped in a pace. "That's Crane," Cole said. His voice was level. "Daltrey's foreman. What does he want?" "To look, to count, to go back and tell Daltrey whether what he's heard is true." He stepped back from the window. "Go upstairs with—" "No." He looked at her. "If I'm hiding when he gets here, it tells him something," she said. "I'm not hiding." A beat. Then he nodded once, and something moved in his expression that was almost a kind of respect. "Stay close. Let me open." "I'll let you open," she said. "That's all I'll promise." They went out to the porch together. Burl stood to Cole's left. The two ranch hands, a broad, quiet man named Reeves and a younger one named Tad, had moved to positions around the yard that looked casual and weren't. Crane rode into the yard with his man behind him. He was thick through the chest, not tall, with pale eyes that moved across everything, the way an accountant's eyes moved across a ledger taking inventory, assigning values. He pulled up and looked down at Cole with the expression of a man who had decided in advance that whatever he found here was going to be an inconvenience. "Hargrove," he said. "Crane." Cole stood, easy thumbs in his belt. "Something I can do for you." Crane's pale eyes found Eleanor. They stayed a beat too long. "Mr. Daltrey sends his regards," Crane said, still looking at her. "Heard there might be some lost property drifted onto your land. Wanted me to check." "Nothing lost here," Cole said. "That's so." Crane's eyes moved to the house, to the window where Eleanor's stomach dropped. Rosie was standing on her tiptoes with her face pressed to the glass, watching with wide, curious eyes. The barn cat was on the sill beside her, equally unimpressed by the visitors. Crane saw her. His expression didn't change, but something behind it did. "Young one," he said. "She yours, Hargrove?" "She's my ward," Cole said. The words came out flat and immediate and planted in the ground like a post driven deep. No hesitation, no wind-up. "All 4 of the Whitmore children are," he said. "Filed the paperwork in town 2 days ago." The yard went very quiet. Eleanor kept her face still by force of will she didn't know she had. 2 days ago. He'd done it on the second day and said nothing to her. She understood in the same breath why, because on the second day, she hadn't slept enough, hadn't eaten enough, hadn't had reason enough yet to say yes. He'd made the decision with the time he had. She was going to have something to say about that later. Right now, Crane was watching Cole with those flat, pale eyes, and a calculation was happening behind them. "That's a bold claim," Crane said slowly. "It's a legal one," Cole said. "Circuit Court will confirm it when Judge Alderman comes through. Any documentation Mr. Daltrey holds regarding those children is secondary to a prior filing." He paused. "You might want to let him know that before he makes the ride out here unnecessarily." Crane sat with that. One of his men shifted in the saddle. "Mr. Daltrey," Crane said, "doesn't take kindly to people inserting themselves into his arrangements." "Mr. Daltrey's arrangements end at my property line," Cole said. "Tell him I said so." Crane looked at Eleanor again. It wasn't threatening exactly. It was the look of a man filing something away for later use. "Who are you?" he said. "Eleanor Whitmore," she said. She didn't blink. "Those are my siblings in that house." "Whitmore." He tasted the name. "You're Warren Whitmore's girl." "I am." "Your father owes—" "My father owes a debt that has nothing to do with me or my siblings," she said. "We are not collateral. We are not property. And whoever told Mr. Daltrey otherwise is either a liar or a fool, and you can carry that back to him with my compliments." The silence afterward had weight and texture. Crane looked at her for 3 full seconds. Then he turned his horse and his man followed, and they rode out without another word. The moment they cleared the gate, Eleanor heard Jesse's voice burst through the front door. "Did they leave? I was watching from upstairs. What happened? Did—" "They left," Eleanor said. Did Mr. Hargrove tell them off?" "We both did." Jesse looked at Cole with an expression of barely contained worship that Eleanor found both touching and deeply alarming. "That was something," Jesse said with
This
tremendous
story was
authority.
posted on the channel
Inside
The Rusty
Jesse,
Saddle. Please do not
he went
repost it in any
reluctantly,
form.
casting one more admiring look over his shoulder. The moment the door closed, Eleanor turned to Cole. "You filed for guardianship," she said. "I did. Without telling me. You gave me 2 days to check on something. I checked on 2 things." He met her gaze without apology. "I would have told you tonight." She held the full weight of it, the thing he'd done without asking. The way it had just worked, the way she couldn't be entirely furious about it, and how much that discomfort irritated her. "You should have asked me," she said. "Yes." He agreed immediately. "You're right. I should have." He paused. "But if I'd asked you 2 days ago before you'd slept and eaten, and had reason to believe I was going to keep my word, you would have said no." She wanted to argue that. She couldn't quite get there. "It's a legal instrument," he said. "It doesn't change anything in this house. It gives the children protection under the law, and it can be dissolved the moment the threat from Daltrey is gone." He said that last part deliberately, laying out the edges of it so she could see exactly what it was and what it wasn't. It was a tool, not a claim. She studied him. "Daltrey is going to come himself now. You understand that?" "I know. The filing buys us time in front of a judge, but it doesn't stop him from riding onto this property with 10 men and doing whatever he decides to do before any judge hears a word about it." "I know that too. So what's the next step?" He was quiet in the thinking way. "Come with me," he said. "There's something I need to show you." He led her to the small room off the main hall that served as his office, a plain space with a desk, a shelf of ledgers, and a locked iron box that he opened with a key from his vest pocket. He lifted out a folded document and held it out. She took it, unfolded it, read it once, then read it again. It was a land deed, the Northern Federal Parcel, the one attached to the guardianship claim, the one that made her siblings worth something to Daltrey beyond simple cruelty. It was dated 4 years ago. It was in her father's name, properly filed, federally registered. "My father filed this," she said. "He did. Before the gambling, before Daltrey." Cole's voice was careful. When he was still a different man," she said quietly. "This parcel is worth more than Daltrey's entire operation," Cole said. "That's why he wants the guardianship. As legal guardian of your siblings, he'd hold administrative authority over your father's filed assets until the children reach majority." Eleanor looked at the deed, then at him. "How did you get this?" "Your father brought it to me," he said. 3 weeks ago, before he left." The room shifted under her. "He came to you." He knew Daltrey was closing in. He knew he was out of road. Cole's voice stayed careful and deliberate. "He gave me this and asked me to keep it safe. He said—" He stopped. "What did he say?" Cole looked at her steadily. "He said his oldest daughter was the strongest person he'd ever known, and he was sorry he hadn't been better, and that if she found her way to me, I should help her." The words hit her like a flat hand against the chest. She stood very still. Her father had known. He'd known Daltrey was coming, and he'd run. And she had known that, had lived with the bitterness of it since the morning she'd woken up and found the door open and the pot boiling on the stove. But he'd also done this, had thought of this, had come to a man he trusted and put something in place the only way he had left. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough for the 4 days in that cellar, for Jesse's breathing and Rosie's thinning face and May going silent in the way children went silent when they had used up everything they had. But it was something. Eleanor set the deed down on the desk. She pressed her fingers flat against it, steadying herself, steadying the room. "Where is he?" she said. Her voice came out even. Barely. "I don't know. Truly." Cole paused. I think he ran because he believed if Daltrey caught him on the property it would be worse for you. Whether that was cowardice or both, she said. It can be both. Yes, he said quietly. It can. She picked the deed up, folded it, held it. This changes the legal fight. If we can get this in front of Alderman Daltrey's guardianship claim falls apart entirely. The land is already properly filed. He has no legitimate mechanism. That's correct. But Daltrey is going to figure that out fast. When Crane reports back, when Daltrey adds up what he's heard you filing me being here, he'll know you're holding something. He'll move quickly. By tomorrow, Cole said. Possibly tonight. She looked at him. You're certain? He doesn't let things develop when he can see the shape of where they're going. He paused. He'll come with enough men to make it look like a legal proceeding. He'll have paper, probably the guardianship document your father allegedly signed. Can he make it stick? Not if we're standing in front of a judge with this. He nodded at the deed in her hands. But we're not in front of a judge. We're here. And between tomorrow and the circuit court, it's just us and what we're willing to do. The weight of that settled over the room like weather. Then we need to be ready, she said. Yes. What do you have? He told her. Burl and Reeves and Tad, who had been at the Broken Horn long enough to have real loyalty, and not just employed loyalty. A neighbor to the west, a rancher named Cowboy, who had his own long history of grievance with Daltrey, and had said as much at every opportunity. The deed and the guardianship filing, which were paper, but were real paper in a fight where paper was the real weapon. And themselves. It's not nothing, Eleanor said. No, he agreed. It isn't. She looked at the deed one more time. She thought about her father's face the last time she'd seen it already, carrying the look of a man saying goodbye without the courage to say it plainly. She thought about what Cole had said. Strongest person he'd ever known. She folded the deed carefully and held it out to Cole. Lock it back up, she said. Somewhere Daltrey's men can't reach it if they get inside this house. He took it, locked the box, looked at her. You're not afraid? He said. It wasn't a question, and it wasn't quite admiration either. It was recognition. The way someone who had spent a long time around fear could tell the difference between absence of fear and mastery of it. I'm terrified, she said. I just don't have the luxury of showing it. She moved toward the door, stopped, turned back. Cole, she said. And she heard the shift in it herself, the line crossed that couldn't quite be uncrossed. He looked at her. Whatever happens tomorrow, thank you. For all of it. For watching that cellar. For the food. For what you said to May in the yard. He held her gaze. Something moved through his face, something old and honest and unguarded. Don't thank me yet, he said softly. Let's get through tomorrow first. She nodded. She went to find her siblings. Jesse was in the kitchen helping Burl with the evening meal, asking questions about everything with the relentless energy of a boy who had decided he was going to learn as much as he could about as much as possible. Rosie was on the back step, negotiating in earnest with the barn cat about whether it was an indoor or outdoor animal, and which one of them had final authority on the matter. The cat's position was clear, and Rosie was undeterred. May was sitting at the kitchen table, and when Eleanor came in, she looked up and searched Eleanor's face with those quiet, seeing eyes. Is something coming? May said. Eleanor sat down beside her, put her arm around her sister's small shoulders. Yes, she said, because May was 8 years old and had earned honesty. But we're ready. Eleanor looked at her sister. We're getting ready, she said. May considered that. Then she leaned into Eleanor's side and said nothing more, because May understood that some things didn't need more words than that. Jesse looked over from the stove, and Eleanor watched him register her arm around May the word ready, and she watched him straighten his spine a fraction, and turn back to what he was doing with a new set to his jaw. 10 years old, and already learning how to carry things without being asked to. She was going to give him back the years he'd spent holding himself together. She was going to. But not tonight. Tonight she sat with May and listened to Rosie's running philosophical debate with a cat who had made his opinions abundantly clear, and she let herself hold the only things she'd ever had that were worth holding. And she thought about Raymond Daltrey somewhere in the dark running numbers and making decisions. And she thought about Cole Hargrove locking a deed in an iron box and saying, "Let's get through tomorrow first." And she made herself ready. He came at noon. Eleanor heard the horses before anyone said a word. She was in the kitchen, and she heard them not one or two, but several, the particular rhythm of riders moving together with shared purpose. And she set down the cup in her hand and picked up the rifle from the table and walked to the front of the house without hurrying, because hurrying was what you did when you hadn't prepared. And she had spent all of last night
This story
preparing.
was posted on the channel The
Cole
Rusty
was already
Saddle.
on the porch.
Please do not repost it
Burl
in any
stood
form.
to his left. Reeves and Tad had positioned themselves around the yard, the way Cole had laid out the night before. Not aggressive, not concealed. Just present the way men were present when they wanted it known that a place was occupied and intended to stay that way. Eleanor stepped out and took her place beside Cole. He glanced at her once. She kept her eyes on the road. Raymond Daltrey rode in with 7 men behind him. She recognized the type before she recognized the man. The particular ease of someone who had never in his life stood on the wrong side of a confrontation and had stopped being able to imagine what that felt like. He was somewhere around 60, silver-haired, with a face that had probably been commanding once and had hardened over the years into something that had forgotten the difference between authority and entitlement. He rode to the center of the yard and stopped and looked at all of it. The hands, the positions, Cole, Eleanor, and he smiled. It was the smile of a man who had seen better preparations than this and remained unimpressed. "Cole," he said. Warm. The particular warmth of a man who had already decided how this ended. "Raymond," Cole said. Daltrey's eyes moved to Eleanor. They stayed there with the assessing patience of someone who was calculating, not admiring. "You must be Warren Whitmore's girl," he said. "I can see the resemblance." He said it like a compliment. That made it worse. "Mr. Daltrey," Eleanor said. She kept her voice flat and clear as a bell. "I've come to clear up a misunderstanding," Daltrey said, and reached into his coat. He produced a folded document and held it up with the satisfied air of a man playing a card he'd been saving. "I have a properly executed instrument assigning guardianship of the 4 minor Whitmore children signed by their father in the presence of a justice of the peace. It is binding and it is legal, and I am here to act on it." Their father had no legal authority to assign guardianship as collateral for a private debt, Eleanor said. And he certainly had no authority to sign away his children's rights in lieu of land payment. Something moved behind Daltrey's eyes. Just a flicker. He recovered fast. "The document was executed before a justice of the peace, Miss Whitmore. That makes it contested," Cole said. "Prior guardianship was filed in town on the 2nd. Judge Alderman will adjudicate when he rides through." He paused. "Until then, those children are under this roof and under my protection, and I'd strongly encourage you to stay on the correct side of the law while you're standing on my property." Daltrey looked at him for a long moment. Something moved through his face, calculation dressed up as patience. "You've made a costly decision here, Cole," he said quietly. "I want you to understand that clearly." "I understand it fine," Cole said. "I don't think you do." Daltrey folded the document and tucked it away with the deliberate composure of a man who had other cards. "I've been patient. I've given the girl time to come to her senses. But I have a legal instrument, I have the support of the county sheriff, and I will not be standing in this yard indefinitely asking politely." He turned to Crane, who was positioned at his right. "Show him." Crane reached into his saddlebag and produced a second document. Eleanor's chest went tight. "Writ of possession," Daltrey said, the same way a man might read a weather report. "Signed by Sheriff Gant this morning, authorizing me to take possession of the minor children for their safety and welfare." He tilted his head with the pleasant expression of a man who had rehearsed this moment. So you see, Cole, this isn't a disagreement between neighbors anymore. This is the law of Cowboy County standing behind me. Cole didn't move, didn't speak. 3 full seconds of silence, and in those 3 seconds, Eleanor felt the ground shift under everything they'd built. A writ of possession was different. A writ meant the sheriff could come out here himself with a badge and deputies, and make it something other than 2 sides standing in a yard. It made it the law against them, however purchased and corrupted that law was. She felt the weight of every rifle on Daltrey's side versus theirs, felt the arithmetic of it, felt the 6 weeks until aldermen suddenly stretch into a distance that seemed uncrossable. And underneath all of that clean and cold, something else rose up in her. Anger. Pure and specific. The kind that didn't shake your hands but steadied them. That writ, she said, was signed by a sheriff who has been on your payroll for 5 years, Mr. Daltrey. The yard went very still. Daltrey blinked. It was small and fast, but she caught it. I don't know what you've been told, Miss Whitmore. I know what I know, she said. She took 1 step forward. I know that my father came to Gant 8 months ago trying to file a complaint about the terms of his loan agreement with you, and Gant turned him away without writing a single word of it down. I know that you have acquired 11 properties in this county in 6 years, using the same method manufactured debt documents signed under duress, men who find themselves owing considerably more than they borrowed. I know that 2 of those families left this territory with nothing but the clothes they were wearing. She heard her own voice level and steady, and somewhere distant, a part of her noted that she sounded like her mother, who had been the kind of woman who could say a hard truth in a quiet room and make everyone in it feel the full weight of it without raising her voice once. And I know, she continued, that Judge Alderman opened a formal inquiry into land acquisition practices in this county 7 months ago, and that inquiry is still open and active. The yard was absolutely silent. Even the horses had gone still. Daltrey's pleasant expression hadn't moved, but it had gone rigid underneath the way a mask went rigid when the face beneath it was doing something entirely different. That writ, Eleanor said, carries exactly as much weight as the integrity of the man who signed it. Bring it in front of Alderman, and let's see how far it travels. Alderman isn't here, Daltrey said. The warmth had drained out of his voice completely. What was underneath was harder, older, accustomed to winning. No, she agreed. But you are. And every action you take on this property today in front of these witnesses will be laid before him in 6 weeks. She held his gaze without blinking. Are you confident enough in Sheriff Gant's reputation to stake your operation on it? The silence stretched like a wire pulled tight. One of Daltrey's men in the rear shifted his horse, and the sound of it was very loud. Then hoofbeats came from the road. Fast. Everyone turned. A single rider came through the gate hard and pulled up alongside Daltrey's men without invitation, which told Eleanor immediately he wasn't one of Daltrey's. He was heavy-set, and somewhere past 50, with the kind of face that had been weathered into patience, and there was a federal marshal's badge on his coat that caught the noon light like a signal fire. Eleanor looked at Cole. Cole had gone very still in a way that was different from his usual stillness, not tense, but alert, like a man who had just seen something he'd been working toward without being certain it would arrive. That's Calloway's doing, he said low enough that only she could hear. He sent word to the territorial office 4 days ago. The marshal pulled up and surveyed the assembled yard with the practiced neutrality of a professional who rode into situations like this and sorted them for a living. He spent a moment reading the positions, the papers, the faces. Then he looked at Daltrey. Mr. Daltrey, he said. Marshal Devlin, Territorial Office out of Carson. He reached into his coat and produced his own document. I have a federal inquiry notice here concerning land acquisition practices in Cowboy County going back 4 years. Your name appears prominently. He glanced at the writ in Crane's hand with the mild expression of a man looking at something mildly distasteful. I'd be very careful about executing any locally issued instruments this morning. The ground shifted again, this time in the other direction. Daltrey went very quiet. The furious kind of quiet, the kind that did a great deal of work on the inside, while the outside stayed composed. "This is a county matter," he said. "The territorial office has no jurisdiction over. The federal land grant attached to the Whitmore children's estate makes it a federal matter," Marshal Devlin said pleasantly. "Which places the guardianship question under federal jurisdiction, not county. Which
This
means
story
Sheriff
was
Gant's
posted on the
signature
channel
that
The
writ
Rusty
carries
Saddle.
considerably
Please
less
do not
authority
repost it
than
in
it
any
might
form.
otherwise." He looked at the writ again. Considerably less. Crane lowered the writ slowly, the way a man lowered something he'd suddenly realized was heavier than he'd thought. Eleanor exhaled through her nose. Controlled. Quiet. She kept her face still. Jesse's voice came from the side window of the house where he absolutely was not supposed to be. "Did we win? Is it over? What's the badge man saying?" "Jesse," Eleanor said without turning. "But I just need to know if—" "Inside. Now." A pause. The window closed. She heard him moving away from it slowly, reluctantly, with the particular heavy-footed protest of a boy registering his objection through the sound of his footsteps. Daltrey looked at Cole. When he spoke again, all the warmth was gone, and what was underneath it was honest for the first time, cold and flat and mean in the particular way of a man who had been winning for a very long time and had not made adequate peace with the possibility of losing. "This isn't finished," he said. "I know," Cole said. "The judge comes through in 6 weeks. A great deal can happen in 6 weeks." He let that sit in the air. "Is that a threat, Mr. Daltrey?" Devlin said, the pleasantness unwavering. Daltrey looked at the marshal, recalculated with visible speed. "It's an observation," he said. He pulled his horse around. "Good day, Marshal." He nodded once at Cole, the nod of a man filing something away. He did not look at Eleanor at all as he rode out. She understood that. She was beneath acknowledgement now. She had won this round, and he wanted her to feel that the rounds were far from over. His men followed. Crane was last. He looked at Eleanor as he passed, and those pale inventory eyes said what his mouth didn't. "I have filed you. I will know you again." Then he was gone through the gate, and the sound of hooves faded into the summer heat. The yard let out a breath. Reeves made a low sound that was almost a laugh. Tad said something to Burl that Eleanor didn't catch. Burl walked back toward the barn, with the unhurried manner of a man who had seen considerable amounts in his life and intended to see considerably more, and was not particularly exercised by any of it. Devlin dismounted and shook Cole's hand. "Close timing," he said. "You made it," Cole said. "That's what matters." Calloway's letter reached the office faster than I expected. Devlin glanced at Eleanor with an expression that occupied the territory between professional assessment and genuine surprise. "You were well prepared, Miss Whitmore." "We had good information," she said. "You had nerve," he said simply. "The two aren't the same thing, and the second one matters more." She didn't have anything to say to that. She turned and went inside. Jesse was in the hallway, practically vibrating with the effort of containing everything he'd seen and heard and needed to report on. "The man with the badge, he's on our side. What did Daltrey say when he saw him? Did you see Crane's face when—" "Kitchen," Eleanor said. "Sit down. All of you." They gathered Jessie May Rosie clutching the barn cat with both arms, the cat enduring this with stoic resignation. Eleanor sat across from them and took one breath and then another. "We're all right," she said. "Daltrey left." "Is he coming back?" Jessie said. "Not like that. Not with a writ." She looked at her brother. "There's going to be a legal proceeding in front of a judge who isn't in Daltrey's pocket. We have the documents we need. We have a federal marshal who has seen what Daltrey is doing. We have witnesses." Jesse sat with that, the way he sat with important things, seriously working through it. "So we stay. We stay." May reached across the table and set her hand over Eleanor's without a word. Just placed it there, palm flat over Eleanor's knuckles. Eleanor turned her hand over and held on. Rosie looked at her with the grave sincerity of a 5-year-old conducting important business. "Can the cat stay too?" "Yes," Eleanor said, and something cracked open slightly in her voice at the absolute last word she would have predicted. "The cat can stay." She was still sitting there 20 minutes later when Cole came in. He stood in the kitchen doorway, not pushing in, just present, in the way he was consistently present, close enough to matter, far enough to give her room. He looked at the four of them at the table, and his face did that thing she'd come to recognize, the going quiet and deep thing, the thing that happened when he was looking at something he understood on a level that had nothing to do with words. "Devlin needs statements," he said, "from both of us. We'll give them." He nodded, didn't move yet. "What you said to Daltrey out there. The inquiry, the other family's Gant's history. Where did you get all of that?" "Burl," she said. "Last night after you went out to speak to the hands. He sat with me at this table for an hour and told me everything he knew." She paused. "Burl knows a great deal, Cole." Cole looked over his shoulder in the direction of the barn with an expression of exasperated and genuine respect. "He does," he said. "You should tell him that occasionally," she said. The corner of his mouth moved. "I'll consider it." He came in then, all the way in, and sat down at the table, and Jesse immediately launched into a detailed and largely accurate account of everything he had witnessed from the side window, which was substantially more than Eleanor had realized he'd seen. Cole listened to the whole account with complete attention, asking questions, taking Jesse's observations seriously in the way that mattered profoundly to a 10-year-old boy who needed to know that what he'd seen and endured and held together had value. Eleanor watched Cole listen to her brother. She had been telling herself for 4 days to be careful. She had been telling herself that 3 days proved nothing, that 4 days proved nothing, that a man could be decent for a week and still be someone different when the cost got high enough. She had been telling herself all of this with the diligence of someone who had earned the right to be cautious and intended to use it. But there was a particular thing happening at that kitchen table, a grown man listening to a 10-year-old boy with genuine respect. Not performance, not the careful attention of someone managing a child, but the real thing. The kind that communicated without words, that what you have to say is worth hearing. And Eleanor found that all of her careful self-management ran directly into it and came apart at the seams a little. It was that. Specifically that. Not the deed, not the legal maneuvering, not even the yard, though the yard had been something. It was the way Cole Hargrove sat at a kitchen table and listened to Jesse like Jesse was someone. She was going to have to be more careful about that. She understood this with the clear-eyed certainty of a person identifying a specific and serious risk. She was also beginning to understand that careful was getting harder by the day. Marshal Devlin stayed the afternoon. He took their statements with the thorough, methodical attention of a man who understood that paperwork was the real battlefield in situations like this, and that a clean paper trail was worth more than any number of rifles. He drank 2 cups of Cole's coffee and told Eleanor twice in different ways that her testimony was going to carry significant weight in front of aldermen. "Daltrey has money," he said before he rode out. "What he doesn't have is a clean paper trail, and now that a federal inquiry is formally open, every move he makes gets scrutiny." He looked at her steadily. "You should understand something, Miss Whitmore. He's not going to come at you directly again. Not with a writ not in the open, but he'll find another way." "What kind of way?" she said. Devlin looked at his coffee cup for a moment. "The kind that's harder to see coming," he said. She held that long after he rode out. Turned it over, examined it from every angle, pressed it for weaknesses. She was putting Rosie to bed when she heard Cole's boots stop outside the half-open door. "She's out," Eleanor said quietly. "Can I show you something?" She came out and followed him down the hall to the north-facing window. He stood beside it and pointed. There was a light on the north ridge, small and steady and unmoving. "Someone watching the property," she said. "Since late afternoon. Reeves spotted it about an hour ago. She looked at the light and thought about what Devlin had said. The kind that's harder to see coming. We have to assume someone's going to try to get to the deed, she said. I moved it, Cole said. It's not in the house. She looked at him. Calloway's property, he said. His wife has a lockbox Daltrey doesn't know about. I sent it with Devlin when he rode out. She stared at him. You put it with the marshal. Safest place it can
This
be
story
until
was
the
posted
proceeding.
on the channel The Rusty
She
Saddle.
turned it over,
Please do not
checked
repost
every
it
angle,
in any
found no
form.
weakness. When did you decide that? About 30 seconds after Devlin arrived this morning, he said. When I saw the writ and understood Daltrey had someone in the sheriff's office, I knew the deed couldn't stay here. 2 decisions made fast and clean without consulting her, and both of them right. She wasn't sure if that was comforting or terrifying. She suspected it was both. That light bothers me more than Daltrey in the yard did, she said. Me too. He was quiet for a moment. You should sleep. A few hours at least. She started to say no. She had the words ready. I'll watch, he said. I'll call you the moment anything moves. She looked at him in the dim hallway. She thought about everything she still didn't know, every variable still in play, everything that could still go wrong in the days between now and Judge Alderman. She thought about Devlin's words, the kind that's harder to see coming. 4 hours, she said. The moment anything changes. The moment, he agreed. She walked back toward the east room, stopped in the hallway. Cole? Yeah. That light on the ridge. She didn't turn. What if it's not Daltrey's man? A pause. I've been thinking about that, he said carefully, since the moment Reeves told me about it. She stood still, the thought settling over her like a second skin. A single man, a small fire, watching from a distance. Not Daltrey's style. Daltrey sent men in groups, sent men with paper, sent men who made noise. A single man on a ridge watching a property where his children were sleeping. She didn't say it out loud, neither did he. Some things needed space before they could be spoken. She went in and lay down beside Rosie, fully dressed, rifle within reach. And she stared at the ceiling and listened to her little sister breathe, and she thought about all the miles between where they'd been and where they were, and all the miles still ahead. She was asleep in minutes. Her body knew something her mind was still working out, that there was a man sitting watch at the end of the hall who had proven himself across 4 days in ways that mattered, and that some quiet part of her had already made a decision about Cole Hargrove that the rest of her hadn't finished catching up to yet. Outside, the light on the ridge burned small and steady through the dark. The light on the ridge was gone by the time Eleanor woke. That was the first thing she checked before she was fully conscious, before she'd remembered where she was or what day it was. Her eyes went to the window and registered the absence, dark ridge, no light, and she lay still for 3 seconds, listening to the house. What she heard was ordinary. Rosie breathing. The distant sound of Burl in the kitchen. The particular creak of the house settling in the pre-dawn cool. She picked up the rifle and went to find Cole. He was at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee in front of him and the look of a man who had not slept, which was exactly what she'd expected. He looked up when she came in. When did it go out? She said. About an hour before dawn. He turned the coffee cup in his hands. I had Reeves ride the ridge at first light. Whoever it was made a small camp up there. Single bedroll, low fire. He paused. They left something. She went still. He reached to the center of the table and pushed a folded piece of paper toward her. She picked it up, unfolded it, read it once, and then her hand stopped moving entirely, because the handwriting was not a stranger's handwriting. It was handwriting she knew the way she knew her own face. In a mirror, had known it all her life, had learned her letters from it, had read it on birthday notes tucked under her pillow and grocery lists pinned to the kitchen door every Saturday morning since she was old enough to read. Her father's hand. Eleanor, I know I don't have the right to ask a single thing of you. I'm not asking. I just need you to know the children are the only thing I did right in a long while, and you are the best of all of them. The deed is real, and the filing is clean. Hargrove is a good man, the best I know. I'm sorry I wasn't better. Don't look for me. Your father." She read it a second time, then a third. Then she folded it carefully along its original creases and set it on the table and pressed her palm flat over it, and she sat down, and she was quiet for a long time. Cole didn't say anything. He understood the specific weight of a letter from someone who had chosen to stay gone, and he sat with her in the quiet and let it be what it was. "He was the light on the ridge," she said finally. "I think so," Cole said. "He watched the whole thing yesterday. The yard, Daltrey, all of it." "That's my guess." She thought about that. Her father on a cold ridge with a bedroll and a dying fire, watching his daughter stand in a yard, and face down Raymond Daltrey with nothing but information and nerve. Watching and not coming down. She let herself feel the full shape of it, the grief and the fury, and the thing underneath both of those that she still didn't have a clean word for. The complicated, unkillable love that didn't go away just because a person had failed you in ways that left marks. "He's not coming back," she said. "No," Cole said. "I don't think he is." "Then the children are mine." Not a question. A fact spoken aloud to make it real, to give it the weight of air and sound. "Legally and every other way." "Yes," he said. "When the proceeding is done, yes." She took her hand off the letter, left it on the table. "I want Jesse to have this someday," she said, "when he's old enough to carry it without it breaking him." "I'll keep it safe until then," Cole said. She looked at him across the table, and she thought, 4 days ago, I had a rifle and a flour sack, and 3 hungry children in a cellar in the ground. 4 days ago, this man was a voice outside a door and boots on dry ground, and I counted to 30, and nearly didn't open it. 4 days was not a long time. She was also beginning to understand that it was plenty of time to know certain things about a person if you paid attention and they gave you honest reasons. "The proceeding is in just under 6 weeks, she said, pulling herself back to the practical, because the practical was what she had. "What happens to the guardianship filing after alderman rules, if Daltrey's claim is dismissed?" "That's your call," Cole said. "I told you when I filed it it was a tool, not a claim. If you want it dissolved after the judge rules, I'll sign whatever needs signing." She nodded slowly, looked at the table, then looked back up. "And if I didn't want it dissolved?" The kitchen went very quiet, the kind of quiet that had mass and direction. Cole set down the coffee cup. He looked at her with the full level attention she had come to understand was simply how he looked at things that mattered to him. "Then it wouldn't be dissolved," he said. She held his gaze. "That's not an answer to what I was actually asking." "I know," he said. "I'm being careful." "So am I," she said. "That doesn't mean we can't say what's true." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, she could already hear Jesse's voice, somewhere near the barn, firing questions at Burl, with his relentless early morning energy. She could hear Rosie calling for the cat in that particular tone that suggested the cat had made another strategic retreat. "What's true," Cole said slowly, "is that this house has been quiet for 3 years. And in 4 days, it isn't quiet anymore. And I don't—" He stopped. Started again. "I don't find that unwelcome." "No," she said quietly. "Neither do I." They looked at each other across the table, and it was not a declaration, and it was not a promise, and it was also not nothing. It was the kind of thing that got said once, and then became part of the foundation of something quietly without ceremony, the way the most important things usually did. 6 weeks, she said. 6 weeks, he agreed. She stood, picked up her coffee, went to stand in the back doorway. Jesse was in the yard, demonstrating something to Burl, with a length of rope explaining with great authority a technique he had almost certainly learned about for the first time yesterday. Burl was listening with the patient expression of a man who had heard a great many explanations from people who didn't quite know what they were talking about yet, and understood that the listening was more important than the accuracy. Rosie was conducting her morning negotiation with the barn cat, who had taken up a position on the fence post that Rosie couldn't quite reach, and was regarding her with the serene detachment of an animal that had discovered the strategic value of elevation. May was sitting on the top porch step watching the road, still patient, those quiet eyes taking in everything. The way May always watched things like she was reading a language other people didn't know was being spoken. Eleanor
This story
watched
was
all
posted
three
on
of
the
them,
channel The
and
Rusty
she let
Saddle.
herself feel it.
Please do not repost
The
it
thing
in any
she'd been
form.
keeping at arm's length since that first night, since she'd climbed out of a cellar with Rosie on her hip and a rifle in her hand, and something had cracked open behind her sternum. She let herself feel it, the way you let a bone reset it hurt, and it was also the beginning of something mending. They were safe, not permanently, not with certainty, not in the absolute guaranteed way that you wanted safety to be when it concerned people you loved. But they were fed and rested, and May had almost smiled twice yesterday, and Jesse had laughed the real way, sudden and loud, and unguarded, the way he used to before their father's troubles had become the family's troubles. And Rosie had named the barn cat captain, and was conducting ongoing territorial negotiations with him that she showed no signs of abandoning. They were safe, and Eleanor had not managed that alone. She heard Cole come to stand in the kitchen behind her. Not beside her, not pushing in, just present in the way he was consistently present, close enough to matter, far enough to give her room. "Devlin sent word this morning," he said. "Early rider came through before you were up." She turned to look at him. "Crane was brought into the territorial marshal's office in Carson last night," Cole said. "He had documentation on him regarding 3 other land acquisitions. The federal inquiry just expanded considerably." Eleanor absorbed that, felt the shape of it. "Daltrey is going to be managing his own problems for a while," Cole said. "It doesn't end him, but it keeps him occupied, and it keeps his attention divided." "Good," she said with plain and uncomplicated feeling. Cole had an expression she hadn't seen on him before, careful in a new way, like a man holding something he wasn't certain how it would land. "There's one more thing," he said. She waited. "Calloway came by at first light before you were up. He had a man with him, a lawyer out of Reno, name of Aldridge. He's been building a case against Daltrey's land practices for 2 years. Private clients, families, Daltrey pushed out by the same mechanism he used on your father." Cole paused. "He wants to talk to you." "Why me specifically?" "Because your father's land grant is the clearest and cleanest example of what Daltrey has been doing. The deed is properly filed. The debt coercion is documented. The forged guardianship claim has 2 signatures. Aldridge says he can demonstrate were never made by the people they're attributed to." He met her eyes. "He thinks if your case goes before aldermen cleanly, it doesn't just secure the children, it opens the door for the other families." The weight of that settled over her differently than she'd expected, not as a burden, as something closer to a reason. "How many other families?" she said. "Aldridge said 13 he knows of, possibly more." 13 families. 13 sets of people who had lost land, lost homes, been broken by Daltrey's mechanisms, and his money, and his purchased pieces of the law. People who hadn't had a Cole Hargrove watching their cellar. People who had simply lost and had nowhere left to go. "When does he want to meet?" she said. "This morning, if you're willing." She turned back to the doorway, watched Jesse finally execute whatever he'd been demonstrating with the rope, watched Burl give a single approving nod, watched Jesse's face do the thing it did when someone whose opinion mattered confirmed that he'd done something right. "Yes," she said. "I'm willing." The meeting with Aldridge happened at Calloway's property and lasted most of the morning. He was a small, precise man, with the sharp, patient eyes of someone who had spent years building cases that required him to be right in every particular, because the people he was building them against had the resources to exploit any error. He spread documents across Calloway's kitchen table and walked her through them with focused, unhurried attention, and he asked her questions that were good questions, specific, intelligent, aimed at exactly the places where the truth was most useful. She answered him directly and completely, and he wrote down what she said with the urgency of a man who had been working toward this for a long time and understood what it meant. An hour in, he set down his pen and looked at her. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "I'll be direct with you. Your case is the strongest I have. The land grant is federally filed. Your siblings are named in the guardianship document Daltrey produced, and that document has 2 forged signatures I can prove were never made by the individuals they're attributed to. If you testify, if you allow me to present your family's case as the lead matter before Judge Alderman, I believe we can not only secure your family's position permanently, but eliminate Daltrey's ability to operate in this territory entirely." She looked at him. "And the other families? Each one becomes substantially easier to adjudicate once the mechanism is exposed and established in the record," he said. "Some of the land has already passed through too many hands to recover, but others—" He lifted a paper. "Several can be recovered outright if Daltrey's original instruments are invalidated at the source." She thought about it for less time than she might have a week ago, because a week ago she'd been in a cellar and had only had enough capacity to think about the next hour. Now she had room. "Yes," she said. "You have my full cooperation." Cole was sitting beside her, and he didn't say anything. But she felt the quality of his stillness change that particular shift. That meant he was taking note of something. That meant something in him had recognized something in her. That confirmed a conclusion he'd already been moving toward. It was the ride back to the Broken Horn that something broke loose in her. They were on the road. Cole beside her, the summer heat settling over everything. Golden and heavy, and she was running through Aldridge's documents in her mind, checking angles, looking for weaknesses. And then she thought about her father's note, and then she thought about Devlin's face when she'd cited the federal inquiry in front of Daltrey. And then she thought about May reaching into her pocket for a second river stone and placing it in Cole's hand like a verdict. The accumulated weight of all of it, the whole terrible and unlikely, and somehow not ending in disaster arc of the past 2 weeks, came down on her at once. She stopped her horse. Cole stopped his. He looked at her. She stared straight ahead at the road, and her jaw was tight, and her eyes were doing something she didn't have full control of, which was a new and unwelcome development. "Eleanor," he said, "I'm fine." The words came out wrong. Too flat. Too quick. "I know you are," he said. "You're also allowed to not be for 5 minutes." She turned and looked at him, and he looked back, and she thought 11 days of running, 4 days in a cellar, a father who loved her in the way that certain people loved real and genuine, and not enough. 3 children who needed her to be the wall between them and everything. 6 weeks of fear she'd been running on and spending down, and now it had nowhere left to go. "I didn't think we were going to make it," she said. Her voice was very low. "I need you to know that. I was doing what I had to do, and I believed in it, but every single day in the back of my mind, I was terrified that I'd led them somewhere worse than where we'd started." "But you didn't," he said. "No," she said. "But that's partly luck and partly you, and I need you to know I understand that. Clearly and without qualification." "It's mostly you," he said. "Luck didn't load that rifle. Luck didn't cite a federal inquiry from memory in front of Raymond Daltrey and a yard full of his men." He looked at her directly. "Every single thing you did right was you, Eleanor. Every one." She held his gaze. And something inside her that had been locked for a very long time, not just for 4 days or 2 weeks, but for years. For all the years of being the oldest, of being the one who stood between her family and whatever was coming, of making herself the wall so consistently that she'd forgotten the wall had a person inside it, that something moved. "Thank you," she said. She meant it without reservation, without any of the careful measuring she'd been doing since the moment she'd climbed out of that cellar. For all of it. For watching the cellar. For the food in the dark. For what you said to May. For keeping my father's note for Jesse." He didn't say anything for a moment. He just looked at her with that deep, still face, and she saw underneath it what had been there since that first night. Not calculation, not charity, not the performance of a decent man. Something older and simpler and more honest than any of those things. "I told you once that somebody should have opened a door for me," he said quietly. "I meant that, but there's something else I didn't say." He held her gaze. "I watched that cellar for 2 days before I walked up to it.
This story
told
was
myself
posted
a
on the
dozen
channel
reasons
The Rusty
why.
Saddle.
They were
Please
all
do
true."
not repost it in any
He
form.
paused. "But the real reason, the one underneath all the others, is that I saw you come back from town with empty hands and walk back to that cellar, and I thought—" He stopped. "What?" she said. "I thought there's a person holding up the world with their bare hands," he said. "And I thought I know what that feels like, and I didn't want to ride past it." She was quiet for a long time. The horses stood still in the summer heat. The road stretched in both directions, and there was no one else on it. "You're going to have to keep being patient with me," she said finally. "I'm not built for easy trust. I'll probably argue with your decisions, even when you're right. I'll question things that don't need questioning." She paused. "I come with 3 children who have strong opinions, and a cat that isn't mine, and a legal proceeding that's going to take up most of the next 6 weeks." The corner of his mouth moved. "I have a ranch that needs a housekeeper. You offered honest labor. I accepted it." "That's not what I'm talking about," she said. "No," he agreed. "It isn't." He looked at her steadily. "I know what you're talking about. And the answer is yes. However long it takes, whatever it looks like. Yes." She looked at the road ahead of them. "Let the word settle. Let it become real." "Then let's go home," she said. They rode back through the gate of the Broken Horn, and Jesse spotted them from the yard and let out a yell that sent the barn cat off the fence post in a streak of spotted indignation. Rosie came running from somewhere around the side of the barn, arms out, entirely unconcerned with dignity. May climbed down from the fence she'd been sitting on and walked because May did not run. May walked with intention to meet them. Jesse grabbed Cole's stirrup before the horse had fully stopped. "Did it work? Is Daltrey finished? Did the lawyer say—" "Not finished," Cole said, dismounting. "But he's going to be." Jesse absorbed this with appropriate gravity. Then he looked at Eleanor with the particular sharp attention of a boy who noticed everything. "You okay?" he said. "You look like you maybe—" "I'm fine." "You look like you might have cried a little." "I didn't cry." Jesse studied her with profound 10-year-old skepticism. "Okay," he said in the tone of someone extending considerable charity. Then he turned back to Cole with the clear intention of extracting every detail of the morning, and Cole let himself be led toward the barn while Jesse talked. May reached Eleanor's side and stopped, looked up at her, those quiet, seeing eyes going through their deliberate work. "We're staying," May said. Not a question. "We're staying," Eleanor said. May nodded once, satisfied. Then she turned and looked at Cole's back as he walked toward the barn with Jesse still talking. She watched him for a moment with that careful, considering expression. Then she reached into her pocket, and Eleanor's breath caught slightly, and May walked across the yard and came up behind Cole and tapped his arm. He turned and crouched down. May held out a third river stone, smaller than the others, rounder. She'd had it in her pocket since before Eleanor had even noticed her collecting them. Cole took it, looked at it, looked at May. "What's this one for?" he said. May was quiet for a moment, the way she was quiet before she said something that mattered. "The first one was for deciding," she said. "The second one was for staying. This one's for being the same person all the way through." The yard went quiet. Even Jesse stopped talking. Cole looked at the stone in his palm, and his face went through something he didn't entirely succeed in keeping private, something that surfaced briefly before the stillness settled back over it. something that had been under considerable pressure for 3 years, and had just found a small, unexpected release. "Thank you, May," he said. His voice was even, almost. "I'll keep all three my whole life." May nodded satisfied and walked back toward the house. Business concluded. Rosie threw herself at Cole's knees with the full committed faith of a child who had decided weeks ago how this story was going to go and was simply living inside that conclusion. "Can we have biscuits for supper? Burl made something today that had a problem with it. Nobody will tell me what the problem was, but there was definitely a problem." Burl heard that. Burl said flatly from the direction of the barn. "Can we?" Rosie said, unrepentant. "Yes," Cole said, and stood up with her on his hip, like this had been happening for years. Like this family had always been in this yard. Like there had never been a version of this ranch without them. Eleanor watched it. She stood in the summer heat on the property of a man who had watched a cellar for 2 days before walking up to it in the dark, and she let herself believe it the full way, not the careful provisional way she'd been believing things for 2 weeks. Let herself feel what it was to not be carrying this alone. That was not a small thing. That was everything. She walked across the yard to where her family was, all the pieces of it, the ones she'd been born with, and the ones she'd found on a road. She'd had no choice but to walk, and she stood in the middle of it, and she held on. The 6 weeks did not pass quietly. Eleanor had not expected them to, and she'd been right not to. Daltrey was a man who had been winning for a long time, and men like that did not accept a setback in a yard and go home and sit with it. They regrouped. They recalculated. They came at things from angles you hadn't anticipated, because the angles you hadn't anticipated were the only ones they had left. The first week, someone cut the fence line on the eastern pasture 3 nights running. Cole and Reeves repaired it each morning without comment, and Eleanor added fence line patrol to her mental map of things that needed watching. The second week, a man came into town asking questions about the Whitmore family at the general store, and Mrs. Calloway sent word out to the ranch the same afternoon, because Mrs. Calloway Eleanor had come to understand was a woman who missed very little and shared what she knew with people who could use it. The third week was quiet, and the quiet was worse than the fence cutting, because quiet from a man like Daltrey meant he was doing something you couldn't see yet. Eleanor worked. That was how she managed the waiting, the same way she'd managed everything since she was 16 years old, and had become the person her family organized itself around. She kept her hands occupied and her mind close to the ground, focused on what was immediate and specific, rather than on the vast shape of everything that could still go wrong. She and Cole had fallen into a rhythm that neither of them had designed or discussed. He was up before her every morning and the coffee was always made. She had the kitchen running before Burl came in and breakfast on the table before Jesse could start asking questions. They talked about the ranch, about the legal proceeding, about the children, and sometimes they talked about nothing in particular, and the nothing in particular conversations were the ones she found herself thinking about longest afterward. Aldridge came to the Broken Horn twice more to prepare her testimony. He was methodical and thorough, and he asked hard questions, in the way that good lawyers asked hard questions, not to be difficult, but because the opposing side would ask harder ones, and he needed her ready. She appreciated that. She answered everything directly, and she did not soften the parts that were difficult to say, because the truth that was difficult to say was generally the truth that mattered most. Jesse had started helping Reeves with the horses in the mornings. He came in at midday with his boots dirty, and his face carrying the particular expression of a boy who was beginning to understand that he was capable of more than he'd known, and that understanding was doing something good to his posture, to the way he held his jaw, to the angle at which he walked into a room. Eleanor watched it happen, and felt something settle in her that had been restless for a very long time. May had started talking more. Not a lot. May was not, and would never be, a child who talked a lot, but more. She asked Burl specific questions about horses and remembered every answer exactly. She told Cole one evening at the supper table that she had been observing the barn cat's behavior patterns and had developed 3 hypotheses about his territorial preferences, and Cole had listened to all three hypotheses with complete seriousness, and then asked a follow-up question that made May's eyes light up in the particular way they did when someone had asked exactly the right thing. Eleanor had excused herself from the table shortly afterward, on the pretext of checking the back door latch, which did not need checking, and had stood in the dark for 2 minutes doing the difficult work of not feeling what she was feeling. And then she had given that up entirely and just let herself feel it. Rosie had renamed the barn cat twice more. He was currently called General, a title he wore with the regal indifference of an animal that considered all human designations equally irrelevant. He slept at the foot of Rosie's bed every night, which Burl claimed not to notice, and which Cole claimed not to have authorized, and which Eleanor had decided was one of those facts of life that was simply easier to accept than to address. The night before the proceeding, Eleanor could not sleep. She lay in the dark beside Rosie's slow breathing, and she looked at the ceiling, and she went through everything. Every document, every piece of testimony, every angle. Daltrey's lawyer might try to push on every place where the truth was clear, and every place where it required careful handling. She had done this every night for 6 weeks, and she was going to do it tonight, because this was the last night she had to do it in, and she intended to use it.
This story was posted
She
on the
heard
channel
Cole's
The
boots in
Rusty
the hallway
Saddle.
past
Please do
midnight.
not repost
They
it in
stopped
any
outside
form.
her door. Eleanor. Low. Careful not to wake Rosie. She got up and came out. He was standing in the dim hallway with his hat in his hands, and the look of a man who had also not slept, and he held out a cup of coffee, and she took it, and they walked together to the end of the hall and the north-facing window, without discussing whether that was what they were doing. The ridge was dark. Had been dark for 5 weeks now. "You ready?" he said. "I've been ready for 6 weeks," she said. "That's not what I asked." She looked at him. He looked back. In the dim light, his face was open in the way it only was late at night, or very early morning, when the daytime steadiness had eased a little, and what was underneath it was closer to the surface. "I'm scared," she said. "And I'm ready. Both things." "Good," he said. "Both things is right." She wrapped her hands around the cup. "Cole?" "Yeah." "Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever Alderman decides, I need you to know that these 6 weeks have been—" She stopped. Started again. "The children are different people than they were when I climbed out of that cellar. Jessie laughs the real way again. May talks. Rosie." Her voice shifted slightly. "Rosie has never stopped trusting, but now she has a reason that's real, and not just because she's 5 years old and hasn't learned better yet." She looked at him. "That's because of this place. Because of you. And I don't want tomorrow to come and go without having said that clearly." He was quiet for a moment. "You gave them a fighting chance before you ever found this ranch," he said. "I just gave you somewhere to fight from." "That's not nothing," she said. "That's everything." He looked at her with that deep, still attention, and she could see him deciding whether to say the next thing or hold it back, and she watched him decide to say it. "I have something for you," he said. He reached into his vest pocket and produced something small. He held it out on his open palm. She looked down. It was a ring. Simple silver with a small turquoise stone set flush into the band. Old, worn smooth at the edges, clearly not new. "This was my grandmother's," he said. "She wore it every day of her adult life, and she was the most stubborn, most capable, most impossible to stop woman I have ever known." He paused. "Until recently." Eleanor looked at the ring, then at him. "Cole." "I'm not asking you to answer tonight," he said. "I'm asking you to take it and think about it. That's all. Whatever you decide, the answer doesn't change anything about this house or those children or any of it." He held her gaze. "But I want you to have it. I want you to know what I'm asking." She looked at the ring for a long moment. Then she reached out and took it from his palm and held it in her own, and she felt the weight of it, the actual physical weight, and the other kind. "I'm not going to think about it tonight," she said. "No." He agreed. Tonight you sleep. Tomorrow you walk into that courtroom and you do what you've been doing for 6 weeks. She closed her fingers around the ring. Ask me again on the other side of tomorrow, she said. I will, he said. And the way he said it, plain certain, like a man who had already decided and was simply willing to wait for the clock to catch up, settled something in her that had been waiting to be settled for a long time. Judge Alderman's court convened in the main hall of the Callow County building at 9 in the morning, and by 8:30 there was not an empty seat in the room. Eleanor had not anticipated that. She'd known the proceeding was significant. Aldridge had told her, Devlin had told her, Cole had told her, but she had not fully understood what significant meant until she walked into that hall and saw the faces. Families she didn't know. Men and women who were watching her with an expression she recognized because she had worn it herself, sitting in a cellar in the dark, the expression of people who had run out of road and were watching someone else attempt the thing they'd believed was impossible. 13 families, possibly more. Aldridge had said that. She understood it now in her body rather than just her mind. She sat at the table beside Aldridge, and she kept her hands still in her lap, and she did not look at Daltrey, who was seated across the room with his lawyer, a smooth man from the city who wore his suit like armor and had the particular confidence of someone who had won in rooms like this before and expected to win again. Cole sat in the first row of seats behind her with Jesse on his left and May on his right and Rosie on May's lap. She had told them they didn't have to be there. Jesse had looked at her like she'd said something in a foreign language. May had simply gotten up and gotten her coat. Rosie had asked if she could bring General and had accepted the answer no with surprising equanimity. They were there. That was all she needed to know. Alderman was a compact, gray-haired man with sharp eyes and the manner of someone who had been lied to by better liars than anyone currently in his courtroom and had developed excellent instincts for it. He ran a tight proceeding. He did not let things ramble. He asked precise questions, and he expected precise answers. Aldridge presented the deed first. He walked Alderman through the federal filing, the registration date, the complete and unimpeachable legitimacy of Warren Whitmore's claim to the northern parcel. Then he presented the guardianship document Daltrey had been wielding for 6 weeks, and he showed methodically and without drama that 2 of the 3 signatures on it were forgeries. He had a document examiner who had studied both the original and the alleged signatures, and was prepared to testify to the specific ways in which they differed. He had letters Daltrey's lawyer objected to, and Alderman admitted over the objection. Daltrey's lawyer cross-examined with skill and tenacity, and found less purchase than he'd expected, because Aldridge had spent 6 weeks closing every gap. Then it was Eleanor's turn. She walked to the front of the room, and she sat down, and she looked at Alderman, and she answered every question he asked her, with the same plainness and steadiness she had been practicing her entire life. The voice she had learned from her mother, who had understood that the truth, said quietly in a small room, carried further than anything said loudly. She told him about the debt, about the morning she'd found the house empty and the pot still boiling, about the cellar, about 4 days with 3 hungry children and a rifle that had 3 bullets left in it, and a door above her head that she'd been prepared to die defending. The room was very quiet while she talked. Daltrey's lawyer rose to cross-examine. He was practiced, and he was smart, and he came at her from 3 different angles, and on each one she held her ground without anger and without performance, just the plain, unvarnished shape of what had happened, because the plain, unvarnished shape of what had happened was more than sufficient. When he sat down, Alderman looked at Eleanor for a long moment. Then he looked at his papers. Then he looked at the room. "I've heard enough," he said. Daltrey's lawyer started to rise. Alderman raised one hand without looking at him, and he sat back down. Alderman took several minutes to write in silence. The room held its breath. Eleanor held hers. She could feel Cole behind her without turning around that particular quality of his stillness. The attentive kind, the kind that meant he was with her fully, even though he hadn't moved. "The guardianship instrument produced by Mr. Daltrey is hereby invalidated," Alderman said. "The signatures on the document are not consistent with the verified handwriting of the individuals they purport to represent, and the conditions under which the instrument was allegedly signed do not meet the legal standard for voluntary consent. The instrument is fraudulent and carries no legal weight. He turned a page. The federal land grant filed in the name of Warren Whitmore is confirmed as legitimate and properly registered. Administrative authority over said grant is assigned to Eleanor Whitmore as legal guardian of the minor Whitmore children effective immediately. He looked up. The guardianship filing made by Cole Hargrove in Calhoun County is confirmed as valid and prior to any competing claim. It will remain in effect until such time as the guardian of record chooses to modify it. He paused, and something in his sharp eyes said that he understood exactly what he was looking at and what it meant. Is there anything further from the Whitmore family? Aldridge glanced at Eleanor. No, Your Honor, she said. That's everything we need. Alderman nodded once. Then we're done. He closed the file. Mr. Daltrey. He did not look up. The federal inquiry into your land acquisition practices in this territory remains open and active. I would encourage you strongly to cooperate fully with Marshal Devlin's office. That will be all. The room exhaled all at once. Eleanor sat for a moment and let it land. Let it become real in the way that things needed a moment to become real. Then she heard Jesse behind her. Not a word. Just a sound. The sound of a 10-year-old boy who had been holding himself together with both hands for longer than any 10-year-old should have to finally letting go of something. She turned around. Jesse had his face pressed against Cole's shoulder, and Cole's hand was on the back of the boy's head, and Cole was looking at Eleanor over Jesse's hair, and his face was doing the thing it did, the going quiet and deep thing, but deeper than she'd seen it before, deeper and more open, and she understood that what she was looking at was a man who had lost everything, and had just in this room, in this specific moment, gotten something back. Not the same thing. Something different. Something he hadn't known he was still capable of having. May was sitting perfectly straight beside them, with her hands folded in her lap, and her eyes bright in the way that May's eyes were bright when she had processed something important and arrived at a conclusion. She looked at Eleanor, and she gave one small, definitive nod. Verdict rendered. Approved. Rosie had fallen asleep 20 minutes into the proceeding, curled against May's side, entirely untroubled. She slept through the ruling and the exhale of the room, and was still asleep when Eleanor lifted her up and held her against her shoulder, and felt the warm, familiar weight of her little sister, and thought, we made it. We actually made it. Outside the courthouse in the summer heat, people came up to her. People she didn't know, men and women from the 13 families, and others people who had been watching the proceeding from the back of the room, people who had heard about it and come anyway on the chance that something different might happen today than had been happening for 6 years. They shook her hand, and some of them said things, and some of them just held her hand for a moment and looked at her in the way people looked when words weren't sufficient, and they knew it. Aldridge found her at the edge of the crowd. 3 of the other cases can move immediately now that the mechanism is established in the record, he said. I'll be in touch within the week. He shook her hand with both of his. You did well, Miss Whitmore. Better than well. Devlin tipped his hat at her from across the street, and she nodded back. Daltrey left without speaking to anyone. She watched him walk to his horse with Crane behind him, and he did not look back. And she thought that a man who had been buying the law for 6 years was now standing in front of a law he couldn't buy, and the weight of that reckoning was just beginning to find him, and it was going to keep finding him. She turned away from him. She was done spending thought on Raymond Daltrey. Cole was waiting at the edge of the crowd with Jesse beside him, and May holding Rosie, who had woken up and was asking somebody about lunch with the focused urgency of a child who had her priorities in precise order. He looked at Eleanor when she came through the crowd toward him, and his face was the open, unguarded version, the one she'd first seen in the dark outside a cellar door and had been slowly learning to read for 6 weeks. It's done, she said. It's done. He agreed. Jesse looked between them with the sharp attention of a boy who missed very little when he was paying attention and was currently paying very close attention. Then he looked away with the studied casualness of someone pretending not to notice something, which meant he had noticed everything. May reached into her pocket. She produced a fourth stone, this one pale and almost white, and she walked up to Eleanor and held it out. Eleanor looked at it. "What's this one for?" she said. May considered for a moment. "This one isn't for deciding or staying or being the same all the way through," she said. "This one is just for after, for when things are different." She paused. "Keep it." Eleanor took the stone, held it in her palm, felt the smooth, cool weight of it. On the ride back to the Broken Horn with the summer heat settled over the road and Jesse running his mouth about everything he'd observed in the courtroom with the enthusiasm of a natural-born lawyer, and Rosie asleep again against Eleanor's shoulder despite having promised she wasn't tired, and May riding quietly with her eyes on the horizon. The way May always rode, Eleanor reached into the pocket of her coat and closed her fingers around the ring that had been in there since before dawn. She held it through the whole ride home. When they came through the gate of the Broken Horn, and the horses slowed to a walk, and the familiar shape of the ranch settled around them, the fence lines, the barn, the sound of Burl's voice somewhere near the water trough, talking to the horses the way he always did. When he thought nobody could hear, Eleanor felt something in her chest settle into a place it had not occupied in years, maybe ever. The particular quiet of a person who has been running so long they'd forgotten what it felt like to stop, and has just stopped and found out the ground was solid. Jesse jumped down and ran toward the barn immediately, already yelling for Burl. Rosie woke up and demanded to know where General was, and went off in search of him without waiting for an answer. May dismounted with her usual deliberate calm, and walked toward the house with the purposeful air of someone who had things to think about, and intended to think about them. Cole dismounted and came around to Eleanor's side, and offered his hand, and she took it, and stepped down, and they stood in the yard in the afternoon light, and she looked at him. She reached into her pocket. She took out the ring. She held it out to him in her open palm. He looked at it, then at her. "Ask me again," she said. He looked at her for a moment with that full, still attention, and then he took the ring from her palm, and he took her left hand, and he held it there between both of his. "Eleanor Whitmore," he said, quiet, plain, the way he said everything that mattered. "Will you stay?" It was not the grandest question. It was not dressed up in ceremony or beautiful language. It was exactly what it was. A man who had watched a cellar for 2 days before walking up to it in the dark, asking a woman who had climbed out of that cellar with a rifle in her hand, and 3 hungry children behind her, whether she intended to remain. It was the right question. It was the only question. "Yes," she said. "We'll stay." He put his grandmother's ring on her finger, and it fit, which was the kind of thing that happened when something was right in the particular way that certain things were undeniably right, and she looked at it on her hand for a moment, this small, worn silver thing that had been carried by a stubborn, capable, impossible-to-stop woman through her entire adult life. She thought it fit her well enough. From inside the house, she heard Rosie's voice at considerable volume, announcing that General was on the kitchen table again, and that she personally had not put him there, which was not the point Rosie seemed to think it was. She heard Burl's flat, resigned response. She heard Jesse laugh, the real laugh, the sudden unguarded one that she had spent 2 weeks being afraid she'd never hear again. She heard May from somewhere upstairs begin to hum, quiet and tuneless, and entirely May. The sound of a child who had decided she was home, and was doing something with that feeling that only May would think to do with it. Eleanor stood in the yard of the Broken Horn Ranch in the summer of 1876, with her family inside the house, making the noise that families made when they were safe and fed and known, and the man who had stood 10 paces back with his palms open and let her take as long as she needed was standing beside her, and the ring on her finger was warm from his hand, and the road that had led here had been hard enough to break a person who was not built to be broken. She was not built to be broken. She never had been. She had walked out of a cellar with nothing but a rifle and 3 hungry children and the absolute refusal to let the world have them, She had stood in a yard and spoken the truth in a quiet voice in front of a man who had purchased every other voice in the county, and found out the hard way that the truth spoken plainly, by someone who has nothing left to lose and everything left to fight for, cannot be purchased at any price. She had done that. Her family had done that. And they had found their way to a place where the door was open and the coffee was made, and someone had decided without being asked that they were worth standing beside. Eleanor Whitmore looked at the house where her children were all the pieces of her family, the ones she'd been born with, and the ones she'd found on a road she'd had no choice but to walk, and she understood with the clean, bone-deep certainty of a person who has earned an understanding by paying the full cost of it that she was not the girl who had crawled into a cellar in the dark, believing there was no road left. She was the woman who had found one anyway, and she was never going to stop walking it.